I will tell you this. At 3:00 in the morning, I was woken with this start. And it was like a horrible dream, but I couldn't remember what it was. It was like one of those mindless dreams, like you forgot your homework or you were walking around in your underwear at school or something. But I couldn't shake it. And I know now that he stopped by to touch base on his way at the other side.
Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate. A dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Kadkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Welcome back to another episode of Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean. I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean, and this is our podcast about love, marriage, and relationships.
Be sure to check us out online on our Facebook page and Instagram at Couple Synergy, or our website, couplesynergy.com. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast or send us any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear more about. And now on to Couple Synergy, an in-depth look at love, marriage, and relationships, where we bring you our experience working with thousands of couples for nearly 20 years.
You know, every day we get to hear intimate details about a couple's celebrations, disappointments, and everyday challenges. We've often wished these stories were shared because we know we are more similar than different. And so we've created not only an avenue where you can hear about people's intimate lives, but an atmosphere where people come over to our home pub, pour a drink, and share their stories.
People like today's guest, Joe McQuillen. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
Maybe we can start out by you introducing yourself, but telling our audience a little bit about you. How old are you? What do you do for a living?
I'm 63 years old. I'm a mortgage broker. I'd been a car dealer for 25 years. Before that, been a mortgage broker for the last dozen years. Been married 28 years to the same wonderful gal who doesn't realize how far I outpunted my coverage when she said yes. And a published author at this point. So
yes, you are a published author. The book is called My Search for Christopher on the Other Side.
Correct.
That's awesome. When did you publish this book?
Just over a year ago. It came out in Thanksgiving of last year. So it's been just over a year, and the feedback has been amazing. And the reason for writing it has become abundantly clear, and it changed kind of my path of my life.
And that's why we're here, is to tell this story.
Yes.
So can you start with, how did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in the city of Chicago. She was a friend of a gal I was dating, and we were all in this group in kind of the Lincoln Park area. And first time I saw her, I was smitten with her. And I had to figure out how to end this one relationship before I could start the other one and kind of shoot the dice. And I remember we had been friends for a bit, and we went out to dinner at a place called Jim and Johnny's, which is a great Italian restaurant that was on Chicago and Troop. And it's gone. But John Tarantino opened up another restaurant in Lincoln Park. She thought it was just two pals having dinner. And then she looked at it halfway through and she said, "Wait a minute, is this a date?" I said, "It sure is for me." Kind of hoping that's for you.
Didn't know.
And that was it. She took my breath away immediately, and it hasn't changed.
What was it about her that you fell in love with?
You know what? Seriously, I mean, she had purple nap. She'd wear coveralls. She was just vibrant and full of life. And she didn't buy into my charm. I actually had to be myself if I was going to win her over. So I was lucky enough to do that.
She was immune to your wiles.
Yeah, she was. Amazing, wasn't it? I know.
And you knew pretty quick.
I knew the minute I saw her. As a matter of fact, I purposely did not pursue her immediately because I knew that my wild colonial boy days would be over once her and I connected at all. And that's exactly what happened. I haven't looked at another woman since then.
Were you raised any religion?
Yeah. We were raised, I'm the youngest of 10 kids, Irish Catholic, Union, Democrat, Irish Catholic. Could have been a sitcom.
No stereotype.
None there. None there. So I was, but far from devout. Everybody was, my mom was a devout Catholic, and we would have May altars, and I mean, I still occasionally pray a rosary, and for me, religion, Catholicism is like a smorgasbord. I take what I want and I leave the rest. And I have a great relationship with God. Him and I are pretty cool. And I'll later on in the podcast tell you there was the broadcast is, not long after I had lost my 16-year-old or my 21-year-old in January of 2016, God kind of presented something to me, and it changed my relationship with him too.
So how old were you guys when you got married?
I was 34 and she was 28.
And how did you ask her?
It was great. Thank you, because this is going to make me look like a hero. She was in Wisconsin at her brother's lake house in Minocqua for the weekend. So it gave me time to put some stuff together. And I told her I'd pick her up. She was living across the street at McQuillen Court. And I said, I'll pick you up and we'll go get some dinner when she got back on a Sunday, late Sunday afternoon. But I picked her up one of those horse-drawn Hanson cabs. And they weren't, and I had a route I wanted the guy to take, and they weren't allowed to go off, the inner drive there for a little coercion with dollars. He found it in his heart, and we went there. And when we were going by the lake, I got on my knee in the cab and asked her to marry me with a ring.
That is awesome.
That's really very romantic.
Yeah. You know what? I remember I'd gone out earlier that day to see her mom and father, who had been divorced, and he's crossed over now, and she's still with us, and a wonderful gal. We saw him this weekend. And I went and saw Warren, who's a tad verbose. Even on the other side when he comes through, he's a tad verbose. And so I was stuck there for a while. And at the end of the strong-willed guy, and at the end of the conversation, he said, and so now here you sit asking my permission to marry my daughter. And I said, Warren, I'm 34 years old. I've been on my own a long time. I'm asking your blessing. I don't ask anybody's permission for anything. But he gave it. And so we got married a year later.
Nice.
That is wonderful.
And how many children do you have?
We have three.
Mm-hmm.
We have three. We have my son, Christopher, who'd be 25, who's on the other side, who crossed over. Caroline is 23, and she graduated from Marquette with a teaching degree, and she's taking classes now. Even though she has an apartment in Milwaukee, because she was doing teaching and substitute teaching and student teaching in the public schools, and they've offered her a full-time substitute position until in August when she leaves for Prague to teach English in Prague for a year.
Wow, that's a great experience.
She's an adventurous gal, that one. Yeah. And my youngest, Will, who's 20 years old, Will had a semester at Boulder, didn't work out. Came home and got him a job selling cars with a buddy of mine. And I just sent him out to Arizona to work a month and a half with spring training for a friend of mine who runs the spring training for Surprise, Arizona. And
cool.
He's out there now. And not a bad job, right?
No, not a bad job. Yeah. Good weather, too.
Yeah, a lot better than here. So actually next Thursday, I'm flying out there for about 5 days. And
what was it like for you to adjust to becoming a dad? And how would you describe how you are as a father and what it was like in your home when your kids were young?
Greatest job in the world. Greatest job. Now, I worked all the time, and I learned that from my old man, who was a railroader who raised 10 kids. 5 were actually cousins that got brought into the family because of a car accident. And nothing was said, nothing was legal. They just took them in and said, our kids, and that's it. That's how they raised them. They had the same last name. So, and I didn't know that this even happened. I was born a month after the car accident until I was in 5th grade. And my sister was a year older than me, didn't know until she was graduating from Mount Mercy High School. They were cousins, not brothers and sisters, but they're brothers and sisters as far as me and the whole world feels and themselves. I got to tell you, there was no greater job in the world. My dad was a wonderful dad. I think it's easy for me to envision a loving heavenly father because I had a good dad. Worked his butt off, raised 10 kids, coached baseball. A flawed guy like we all are, But I always knew I was loved. So I always had this confidence that even if my behavior wasn't acceptable, I knew that I was loved. And I've been sober since 28 years old. I was wild, man. And so I've been sober for 34 years now. I think a big part of my story is the compulsion to drink was lifted by a source outside of myself. So that's when I started really believing in a personal relationship with a higher power or God. I'm comfortable with that term.
What made you decide to become sober?
I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. It wasn't one big event. And there were plenty. High-speed pursuits, fights, all of them, One day I just had enough of enough and started getting sober and stopped drinking. But my favorite sister, she crossed over just over a year ago. She was my son Christopher's godmother. And single woman, wonderful gal. Got married right out of high school. Husband turned out to be a bum. She went and got her undergraduate degree, raised the kids by herself, got her master's MBA at Wharton, right? Ran a big health plan in D.C. I'm just an impressive gal and a big source of love for me and strength. And I was living in D.C. and stopped drinking for a little bit, went back to it. And she said, if you decide you wanted to drink, stay away from me and my kids. She said, I've already buried one brother. I'm not going to watch you die. And it was the first time, being the youngest of 10 kids and spoiled and pampered and baby, it was the first time anybody held me accountable. And that was my first steps on the journey to get sober. And it was important. I was tired of disappointing everybody. And I could have had T-shirts made up and handed out that said, I will disappoint you, because I did,
Why do you think you did? Why'd you go down that path?
Genetics. I don't think it was a choice I made. I'm not a victim. God forbid. I never took a punch that I didn't have coming, and I took a few. I think genetically I was predisposed.
Addiction ran in the family.
Yeah. And typical Irish Catholic. And I didn't know any better. At the time, it kind of was, every party had alcohol. We had a refrigerator in the basement that had hockey pucks in the freezer and just beer in the refrigerator. And I didn't know everybody didn't have a beer fridge, right? So it's just how we were raised. And every celebration was surrounded alcohol. Every devastation, every death, and it was alcohol. So, but where other people could turn it off, I didn't have an off button, so I would just go. And, I was given this opportunity. It was $1 million shot at sobriety. And my life has been amazingly different. It's funny, about 15, 18 years ago, probably 20 years ago, one of my nieces was getting married in Boston. And she said, Uncle Joey, will you say grace for us? And I thought, wow, that's really nice. And I stood up in this, it was the World Trade Center of Boston, a beautiful look overlooking the bay. And I said, I'm really flattered that Kathy would ask me to say grace. I said, here I am. They asked me to say a prayer when in the old days, you just prayed I didn't show up at weddings, So it was, I was given this shot and I ran with it, and it's still part of my life. 34 years later, I still go to AA meetings and I still carry the message, so.
I think this is a really important message for people out there, and especially the ones that feel that this is something in me. It's genetic. I can't help that it happens.
And you're not bad.
But I can do something about it.
Right. You're not bad. And you got to be ready when you're ready. I wasn't ready at 25, even though my life was kind of a mess at 25. But at 28, for some reason, I was ready.
And you went the AA route?
I did. No, I tell you what, anybody gets a shot, go to treatment.
Yeah.
It just,
regardless of what it is.
Right. And whatever your malady is, it just gets you on the path, right? I didn't, I left the job and had moved here and to get sober, and AA filled that gap and still does spiritually for me.
Is that one of the reasons you didn't get married until 34?
Oh yeah. I had nothing to offer anybody. I was a fun first date, but it kind of wears off kind of quickly.
Yeah.
So I knew that. I had nothing. You can't serve two masters, right?
Right.
And when you're an alcoholic, you're all you want to do is keep that buzz going. But I tell you this, I wouldn't trade I'm willing to trade the first half of my life for the second. I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change one incident, one fear, blow up, one anything, because it got me where I am. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
It sounds like there was a lot of grief also, in your family growing up.
You didn't talk about grief. You drank yourself through that. I mean that seriously. We were Irish. We were stoic. That's how we handled it. I remember my dad referring to his mom dying of melancholy. It's like, wow, how do you die of melancholy?
Yeah.
Quite often you take your life, I think, and I know his dad took his life, and I wrote a book and I have a chapter that talks about that, so we didn't, who was it? Daniel Pat Moynihan said, to be Irish just to know that in the end, the world will break your heart, so I think we just accepted that life was this It was full of joy and mirth and this Eugene O'Neill tragedy that would, kind of be a thread through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of death. This is in big families and tragedies, and you didn't talk about it. You just packed up and moved on.
That's a very interesting point. I think that cultural influence is really big. We have, several clients who are actually from, Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's very prevalent over there too. Anything negative that happened, any death that happened, you just kind of moved on and you didn't really process it at all.
And you never talked about it.
Right.
And remember, that's another generation. My parents have been gone for quite a while, but they came from a time that you didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
If there was a falling out in the family, you didn't talk about it. And as we know now, secrets keep us sick.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that my parents did the best they could with the tools that they were given at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as flawed as I am, I've done the best I can with the tools that I've been given,
In what way were you a different dad than your dad?
I was sober. My dad was a wonderful man, but he was an alcoholic. He never drank in bars, never missed a day's work. But, I think he self-medicated through alcoholism. I think he had a hard life. He worked very hard. And my dad was a wonderful guy, but there's some limitations, and I knew I was loved, but I learned a lot from him. And one is a work ethic, and another is to express love. Been kind of blessed to being a bit of a tough guy, I finally Sunday was, I think I finally hung up. I'm finally done playing hockey. I took an elbow injury, and I'm thinking I'm done. I'm 63. I'm on my last dog and my last pair of skates. So. But I did learn a tenderness. And my old man's nickname on the railroad was Iron Joe. But my old man couldn't do a toast without tearing up, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
So I learned that it was okay, that tough guys cry. And it's okay. I think like him, I worked too much, and I felt it was my responsibility to give the kids everything they could. And like him, when I was with those kids, I was, they were the most important things in the world to me.
You were present.
I was present. Yeah.
You want to talk about Christopher?
I do.
Yes.
There's nothing I like talking about more than Christopher. Thank you.
Can you take us back to that day?
Yeah.
Can we start there?
You know what? Christopher was my oldest. We could just be together. We connected. We could be in a room and not even talk and just know we loved each other. And he knew I got him. He wasn't a good student. Neither was I. Somehow things work out with a little help and hard work, right? And he knew that my love was never in question, and Sally's love was never in question. So he was home from Northern Illinois, where he was probably going to bomb out of college pretty soon. And it was Christmas of 2015, and we had this wonderful Christmas. It was, I don't know, went over the top, just the kids together. And it was like looking at one of the old Christmases my old man used to put together, and I knew that was special. There's a line from The River Runs Through It that says, and I knew at that moment that life is an art and this moment could not last. But that was one of those moments, right? That it was perfect. And let me tell you a little bit about Christopher. The year before, we had gone on a cruise right before Christmas. We all wanted to be home before Christmas. And on Christmas night, so we'd gotten home early Christmas Eve. I made some food. Grocery stores are closed, so I had everything ready. I had a roast that I was cooking. And he came up to me Christmas night and said, "Dad, I'm going back to the fraternity house." I said, "Why?" And he said, there's a kid that couldn't get home, and he's alone. He said, "Can you put a plate together?" So we did. We ran to Walgreens and got a half price, gift of cologne set or something, and wrapped it up. And part of me wondered, is this kid hustling me? Has he got a pretty co-ed on there,
Yeah.
And the following year, at his wake, excuse me, that kid came up to me and said, "Mr. McHugh, I was the guy Chris came home for." So that was the kind of guy Chris was, wild, fancy-free, but God gave a good heart.
Kind and caring.
Kind. So that Christmas, they'd all gone out. We were all relieved. They made it home New Year's on one piece. And it's funny, I'm sitting in Amy with a bunch of other dads like, "Do you get word yet? Your kid home? Is your kid home?" And so he'd made it. Everything was good. And then they decided on the last day, which was Saturday night, they were going up to a beach house in Lake Beulah, Wisconsin. There was a dozen of them. And then they were all going to come home Sunday and then go back to school the following couple of days. So it was their last hurrah, right? Yeah. And Sally and I were a little bit relieved that they weren't going to be running around the city of Chicago, which is dangerous, especially if you've been, having a couple of cocktails. So they went up there and they went to a local pub and shot pool and did what kids did. And there was a dozen, like I said, and kicked up their heels. Went back to the beach house where the party continued. They were all spending the night. Nobody was driving. 3 of them went outside, walked by an unlocked boathouse, or 4 of them jumped in a 3-man canoe with layered clothing and Timberland boots and too much to drink and paddled out, and all 4 of them drowned that day. None of them made it back. I got a call the next morning, and I'm waiting for him to come home to watch the Bills game. I grew up in Buffalo. He was a huge Bills fan. We'd watch games together when he was in town, and when not, he was able to use the DirecTV to get at the frat house, and they all watched. They had Bills flag fly. I was surprised I hadn't heard from him. Texting him, where are you, buddy?
Did you have a feeling?
No. Sally did. I will tell you this. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I was woken with this start. And it was like a horrible dream, but I couldn't remember what it was. It was like one of those mindless dreams, like you forgot your homework or you were walking around in your underwear at school or something. But I couldn't shake it. And I know now that he stopped by to touch base on his way at the other side. So I did not. And then I get a call from his friend who said, Mr. McHugh, 4 of the boys are missing. So, grabbed the dog, put on some boots and jumped in the Jeep. And I really drove up anticipating him to be once again, that they passed out in somebody's barn or met a pretty girl or whatever. And halfway up, I got a call that said it's no longer a search, but a recovery, that all 4 of them had drowned. And my world changed completely at that moment. It's never been the same. So I go up there, boats on the boat, lights, boats, and they're recovering. And the kids were all huddled together crying, and the parents, there were 4 sets of parents were at one corner. I just kind of stayed away and would talk to the police. And finally I said, they wanted me to identify a picture. And Chris was the first one recovered. And I said, I wanted to see my boy. And they wouldn't let me. Wisconsin, they won't let you do that. Mm-hmm. So then we had to arrange for, so I had to get on the phone and talk to his mom, My son wrote a term paper about the first or the worst, how her cry echoed through the house. And he knew that something seriously had happened, And so, that was the start of the beginning, the beginning.
How long was it from when you knew he was missing till they actually found him?
45 minutes, half hour, halfway up the drive, So, we arranged him in all the details, and his godfather, my pal Michael, was with me that entire week for the arrangements for funerals and graveyards and tombstones and banquets and whatever goes into these things. And that's a funny part you asked me about that I'll tell you. So for the first 3 nights, I would just get home, and you're moving from, very emotionally from the time I wake up. And at night I would take an Ambien to try to crash, which I don't recommend, but I don't, I think I take one Ambien about every, 6, 8, 9 months. But at the time, before I go to sleep, I got on my knees and I said, I would always thank God for my family and my recovery, for my sobriety. But I said to God in my prayer, I said, but I'm PO to you. We're not good, you and me. You took my kid. The 3rd night, I lay in bed and I get a message, like a feedback, in my head. But it said, I didn't take your son. Your son's self-will and recklessness caused him to come home early, and I welcomed him home. And remember, I lost a son too. At that point, I knew God wasn't this protagonist who moves us around like chess pieces. I knew that he was the guy keeping me up while I was putting these things together. And my relationship with God had gotten immensely close ever since then. And I know my son's with him.
Thinking back and maybe not realizing, had you had other kind of conversations with God type of experiences?
In my life, one. Now, once again, getting sober, I believed was that was a gift from a loving universe, God, whatever you want to call it. So I'd pray, but I never heard back. One time I remember driving to a meeting, and I was going down Glencoe, and going into a meeting at a buddy's house. And there was a woman walking two dogs in the middle of the street when there's sidewalks on both sides of the street. And I remember thinking, what kind of jerk wagon? And I drive by, I just got a message that said, come on, man. And basically I think it was a message that said, I've given you this gift and this is how you're going to treat people, So no, up until that time I hadn't. And so, but I must have known because I knew where that came from, and I think they say, and it's only since then, since I started meditating, and I'm told that, prayer is talking to God and meditating is listening.
So I was going to ask you about that. When you say you prayed, how often did you pray and how did you pray?
I still do. I get on my knees quickly. I touch base. And what I do is I'm showing homage. It's kind of like saluting an officer. Mm-hmm. I'm on my knees acknowledging a source greater than me in the universe, which I think is a pretty good idea for everybody to do. So I do it on my knees. I say a quick, prayer, then I jump in.
Is it like a rote prayer, like the same thing every day, or is it more colloquial?
Whatever it is. It's like, thanks for this, thanks for that, help me with this. I'm still to this day not above asking for help, and they say that God answers all your prayers. Yes, no, and you're not ready yet, mm-hmm. And so, he and I are good. I know he didn't take my boy.
And then after that day, had you meditated before that day?
No, I tried unsuccessfully.
Okay.
Typical ADD, right? It was like I'd see, hey, look, there goes a pretty bird, So no, it was only after I started connecting with my son that I started meditating.
And how did you start connecting?
This is a great story. So maybe 15 years before, on a spiritual whim, I went and saw a medium. Now, I remember being in college, and I was doing a show called Guys and Dolls. And it was this good-looking gal, and we were on a picnic, and she started talking about her mom being a medium. Now, this was 1976, when that stuff was kind of really out there, right? And she could tell that I wasn't making fun of her, even though I was kind of a flip guy, that I was really intrigued. So she told me all about Lily Dale, and it turns out Lily Dale was 30 minutes from where we were having this picnic. And I spent the night, I went there last June and had an amazing experience in July, had an amazing experience in Lily Dale. So I had gone and seen this woman, and she's actually, I'm going to see her next week. She's a medium in Surprise, Arizona now, but at the time she was like in Arlington Heights or somewhere out there. And I met with her, and I met with her, and we were in a public library where she had a room that she would rent or they'd let her use. And it really wasn't working for me much, right? She was talking about this and that. And I remember I hadn't lost anybody. I had a brother that took his life at 29, but we were not amazingly close. And I didn't feel this devastating loss. But we got through it, and I'm kind of looking at my watch going, let's move this along. I got to go. And she said, your dad's here. And I stopped, and she said, and your dad's showing me a caboose, and he's saying railroad. At that point in time, I stopped. My dad spent 40 years on the road. Every boy in the family worked on the railroad. My grandfather was a railroader. My favorite Uncle Bill was a railroader. My brothers all worked in railroads and through college. So we were a railroad family. Now, this was in 2000. This is before Google and my old man was just a common blue-collar guy. You look at him up today, you won't find anything about being on the railroad. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow. Now, he didn't give me any of the secrets to the universe or the, numbers for the next lottery. He just told me that he was there. And now, fast forward 16 years later, when I needed some answers, I thought back on this memory of connecting with somebody who had crossed over when Chris had died and when Chris had drowned. I don't like using the word died. So that was my next move. I reached out to that same medium who had since moved to Arizona, called her on the phone, and we had an amazing session. She told me things about the accident that nobody knew. She told me things about the accident I didn't know until I got the police report.
So she was able to connect with him.
She said, this is amazing that I can connect with somebody who crossed over so recently.
How quick was it?
A couple days.
Wow.
Like the next day. And and she said, he stopped by your room on the way. As a matter of fact, he said that at some point they had an option of turning back or not. Chris didn't make a decision, and it was made for him. And she said that was him stopping. She said, look, when people, souls are crossing over, they go somewhere where they felt love, where they were happy. And he always felt that with you. That's why he stopped there. And that was that weird feeling I couldn't shake. I
don't know if Sherry told you, but I had a near-death experience at 19. And exactly what you're describing is what I felt. And I did have a choice up until a point where I would not have.
Yeah.
And that feeling of love and peace and just this release of pain, that was definitely something that you experience as you get closer and closer.
You know what? I'm writing a second book, and NDEs are going to be part of that because I had no exposure to that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. Remember, the great thing, and we'll talk about the book later, is that this is, I walked in completely open. I didn't have a whole lot. I had one experience with a girl that, I had the hots for in 1976, whose mom was medium. That was it, right? I didn't have any preconceived feelings about what all this was. And then a brief drive-by to know my dad was okay.
When you talked to the medium a few days after Christopher's passing, what did that do for you?
It gave me hope. Now, you got to understand, I'm a mortgage broker for 12 years. For 25 years, I was a car dealer. So I'm not a naive cat. You know what I mean? You're not going to put one over on me. So I wanted to figure out if this was real or if this is Memorex. And if this is all hokey BS, let's cross it off the list, right? Mm-hmm. But I wasn't ready to live in a world that was devoid of my son. So I wanted to exercise every option to find out if any of this was real. And if it was real, how do I connect? How do I get in?
Mm-hmm.
I want in. And when I met with her, or when I talked to her on the phone, it was, this is real. I want in. Now, an interesting thing is I had a couple of, and like all great mediums, she said, look, we can't do this too often. You can't, A, he's got stuff to do. And B, there's not all kinds of fresh information. So we don't want to talk to you I don't want to talk to you every week, So I talked to her a few times. I went and saw a woman that woman from 1976,
mm-hmm.
who's a medium now too, in Wisconsin. And it was fine. It wasn't really honed in. And I think she's more of like a pet, an animal,
mm-hmm.
Type. And good gal though. So I saw her. And then on his birthday, in June, that was on his birthday. In June, I decided I'd read a book by Bob Olson, just a phenomenal book. And he was an investigator and decided to do the same thing. He came in kind of thinking it was all BS, then wrote this amazing book about his experience.
What's the name of that book?
I don't know, but Bob Olson. He wrote one novel and one, which is, the novel's fine, but
mm-hmm.
the other book is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got it on the phone, so I can look it up. So what I didn't realize was that he one of his website things is he rates mediums in different states. So I looked up Illinois and I looked up Chicago area, and I pulled up this cat, Andrew Anderson, in Hoffman Estates. So I make an appointment, and I'm one of these guys who always has a back door, right? It was like, I'm not going to give money up front, because if I want to cancel, I'm canceled, right? I'll commit to the time, but we'll see. So the day I got to go to see him, and what I wanted, as much as this woman who was, Nancy Myers, her name, in Surprise, Arizona, was amazing, she was on the phone, and I wanted to look into the eye of somebody looking at my son. So I figured, I looked up Andrew. He had some high ratings. Some police departments had used him for stuff. So I went out there to meet with him, and he said, bring me a couple pictures, Chris. Well, before I got there, it was like at 11:30. So, I'm up at 6:30 every morning. So I had some things to do. And one of the things I did was I went to his grave. Now, here's something kind of funny. I'll tell you a little bit about me, I think. We picked out his grave, my buddy Mike and I, his godfather, and we went to Sacred Heart. We had, and the woman who recommended it was just this phenomenal funeral director, Grace Martinson. And so we got there, and the woman who was, selling the graves wasn't happy about showing up on January of, freezing cold and snow all over. So they said, look, most of these graves, are sold out. Back here is a great area. It's toward the back. She said, we had 6. I said, Mike, I'm going to take 3. You want 3? He goes, yeah, we'll take all 6. She goes, all right, which one do you want Chris in? And I said, well, there's a little tree maybe at the end. Well, unbeknownst to me, they were burying next to somebody else's grave, kind of like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it was a guy, his wife, and then Chris. And then 5 openings. And I said, we couldn't tell because the snow. So when the snow melted and I could see, they hadn't put you couldn't put the stone down until the weather broke.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go there and I'd say, man, it looks like he's their kid. And that wasn't no fly. It's my kid. So I called, refused to talk to her and tried to talk to her. She didn't even talk to her boss. Good guy. And I said, look, we got to move. Now, you guys, she should have said, why don't you move him next to it? Why don't you do, a little PR would have gone a long way. She didn't want to leave her warm Lexus. I said, but either way, it's going to happen. He called back and said, and I said, and you're going to be forever known in every story like this as the wonderful, generous people of Sacred Heart who benevolently fixed their problem and moved my son over, or the greedy, money-sucking, imposing people who made me pay. So I paid half price. So we got to compromise on this. So I moved him. Over one grave. And I was so grateful I did that. It was the best move. And I wrestled with that. You're still kind of foggy and goofy. And I wrestled with that. But I go to that grave all the time. And I'm not like some sad old man feeding pigeons. I go there to connect with my son. I know he doesn't live there, but we meet there. So the ground, long story short, and once again, being Irish means you don't want to tell a short story. Long story short is the grave had loose dirt all around because they'd moved. Mm-hmm. So I planted shamrocks around it. I started shamrocks. And then I stopped, and it was kind of like this, but it was a leather bracelet that Chris had given me when he was about 3 or 4 at Disney World. It said Pop on it or Dad on it and had Goofy. And I pulled that out of my jewelry box and put it on for the first time in, 15 years. And wore that to see Andrew, planted and then boom, shot up there. And I walked in with Andrew in the same room I was in a couple hours ago. And he said, Chris is here. God, he's beautiful. He's a gorgeous looking kid. He said, and he acknowledges you were planting something today. And he acknowledges you're wearing the bracelet he gave you.
Wow.
He'll be looking at me like now, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way.
Yeah.
My wife didn't know it was just kind of a whim.
Right.
Amazon ordered shamrock seeds and planted them, and they sprouted for a few years, and that's when I said, wow, buckle up. This stuff is real, and we talked about, he wanted to see pictures, and he said, these pictures are all laughing and smiling. But there was another side. There was part of him that maybe didn't want to be here still, in some level. And we knew that he'd suffered from depression and that scared us, right? But, that was the start of this really journey that led me through. I was meeting with Andrew this morning before I came here,
Yep.
That led me to today, led me to write a book, led me to talk to parents who've lost kids,
Was your wife ever interested in speaking with Christopher through mediums?
Yes. Was she before this? No. When it was apparent. Oh, it's funny you should say that. Let's fast forward or fast backwards. In March, Meg, Jen Weigel? Mm-hmm. All right. Jen's a guy. It's just a great gal. Just a great gal. Sally, her college friend, who's a lovely gal, arranged for her to go see Rebecca Rosen in Denver. Right? We flew Sally out to Denver. She set it up, which was really, really lovely. And she was out there. She ran into Jen, who runs a radio show. Mm-hmm. And I've been on her show a bunch of times. We've become friends. So Sally did. And this was like March. So he'd been gone a few months, but he had told her things like, sending you peanut butter cups. And Sally would mail him peanut butter cups when he was in college or boarding school because that was his favorite. And she told him a few other things that only they knew. Mm. So, yeah, she was interested in it, and I was dying. I'm home saying, send me the link, and then so we both completely honed into this, I think mine's at a different level only because I get these downloads from Chris that happen relatively often.
Did this ability to be able to connect with them help the two of you with your own grief?
Yes. I think if either one of us didn't buy in, it would have been difficult to stay together, to be honest with you. Now, we grieve separately. We're independent people. And then we come back together. I think the number is 80% of people who lost kids get divorced.
Mm-hmm. It's very
really high.
Yeah.
It's high. So I think since we were both on this path, the spiritual path, and what kept us together was we loved each other. We both had this amazing love for this first child, and we love our other two children amazingly much, so, we worked on that, but we grieved separately, then came back together as a unit to love each other, and so if she dismissed this path I was on as hokey BS, wouldn't have worked. And if I, invalidated her beliefs, it wouldn't have worked. So she completely buys into it. I mean, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll get a download, and the next day I'll say, Chris said to say this to you. And she goes, oh, that's great. It's like, if you're taping, if you're miking that, it sounds like crazy,
I'm going to ask you a kind of a multi-leveled question.
Sure.
Do you have any control over what you're calling downloading? What do you mean by downloading? And you said people see him. Do other people channel in the same way, or is it more through they hear or?
Great question. I mean, there are the clairs, right? There's clairvoyant, which means you can see. I don't have that gift. I wish I did. I'm hoping I get it, but I'm greedy. But I'll accept what I get. There's clairaudient, which is what I get. I get downloads, which are voices that in my head that I then write. And when clairsentient, which I feel him and I smell him. It's funny. I can smell the sweat of a teenage boy, and it's very comforting to me. So those are the clairs, and some have them all. Andrew and sees, and Sherry, I think, sees and hears. So I would love to be able to see, and I'm hoping. And when I meditate, I envision him, but I don't get that. I don't see him like I'm looking at you, where others have that gift. I'm grateful for what I got. I'm very auditory. I love listening to books. I download books. My book is an Audible, thank God. And the guy who reads it has the same inflections and nuances that I do. So I'm so grateful for that, because I had no control over who was reading it. So it's not unusual, or I'm not surprised that what I get is this, So my thing is that it started on his anniversary, the first year. 3 o'clock in the morning, I got up, went in my office at home, which was his bedroom. And I burned some sage. I lined chakras. I know I don't look like a guy that burns sage and lines chakras, but I do, man. And I had pictures of him and candles, and I started meditating. And on the desk was a legal pad and a pen that I had gotten at Andrew's, one of his group. And I I'm an old ball player, right? So if I'm on a hitting streak, I don't change anything. So I use the same big velocity pen. I order them in bulk. I go to Staples to get the same legal pad. That's their name.
Superstition pad.
I'm not going to screw with this. I don't know all the rules, you know what I mean? But I'm not going to break one, right? When you're on a hitting streak, you don't wash your jersey. That's just the way it goes. And so I got up, and I all of a sudden, I just picked up a pen and started writing. I said, hey, Pop, you're not going to believe this. The colors are so vibrant. They're purple. They're blue. It's amazing. The pinks are strong. The greens are strong green. You're going to effing love this here. This is amazing.
When that was happening, did you feel your hand?
Nope.
Okay.
And that's a great question, because I wrote my book about all of these and meetings with mediums and all of that stuff. But I wrote this, and the main thing was to get the messages that he was giving me. I called it automatic writing until I finished Bob Olson's book, where he made reference to automatic writing. You go into a trance, you write in somebody else's handwriting, you're not aware of anything that you're writing. And I said, damn, that's not mine. So I looked up, and mine's called either channel writing or spirit writing, where I'm aware of what I'm writing. Now what I do is, right after I'm done writing, turn the light on and I edit it to make sure, because my handwriting is, make sure I don't, because it's not my words, right? So I just start writing, and it happened at 3 o'clock this morning. A couple times a month it'll happen, where I can get my lazy butt out of bed at 3 a.m. I'm like, what, I'm just writing. And how I knew this wasn't me, because of course you question your own sanity, and how I knew this wasn't me. He said to me, you got to let go of this thing with Scotty. I loved him and he loved me. It wasn't his fault. Scotty's the kid whose parents owned the lake house, rich kid, right? Owned the lake house. And I was mad that there wasn't any supervision. But truth of the matter, it had nothing to do with Scotty. This could have happened in your basement. You know,
Absolutely.
I come home one time and there's a bunch of Will's hockey friends, you know, taking slap shots off the roof.
Right.
You know what I mean? It happens. It wasn't anybody's fault. But, you know.
You had to go. You go somewhere with that.
You know, Irish Alzheimer's, you forget everything but the grudges, right? You know? So I had to hold on to something. And he said, you got to let go of that, right? And I thought, I wasn't ready to let go of that. This wasn't my idea. But I thought, sure, Chris, for you, I'll let go of this. Besides, when am I ever going to see this kid again? 12 hours later, on his anniversary, Chris Haley and I were going to meet at sunset to let the Chinese lanterns go. I get a call at 3 o'clock from some of his college buddies and say, hey, Mr. McHugh, we're at the grave. You want to swing by? 50 kids.
Wow.
You know, impromptu. And one of them was Scotty.
Wow.
Tears in his eyes. You know, and I just hugged him and said I loved him. Wasn't his fault. Please, if one thing anybody can understand is that, you know, it wasn't a decision that God made to pull him, and it wasn't something that we did wrong. And I was, you know, I had to come to grips with that. Am I being punished for my past sins? That's when God came to me and said that, I knew that that's not the kind of God, loving God that my son's with, you know. So I get these messages and he said things like, you know, life should be easier, should be like a canoe cutting through water. Do you think I'm ever going to use the analogy of a canoe for something good?
Right.
That's why I know it's not me. Yeah. You know, he tells me things I'm not ready to deal with yet. And I do. And
do you think he's pushing you?
Oh, for sure. He would tell me, you know, you've got to finish this book. You need to help people. There's fathers that need to hear this. I went and saw Thomas John. The first thing Thomas John said is, wow, your son looks like Brad Pitt. He's gorgeous. He said, tells you got to finish your book. I was like, Jesus, I'm going as fast as I can. I'm getting harassed from the other side. But yes, he pushes me. I'm a different guy than I was in January 2nd, 2016.
Yeah.
You know, and I care about different things.
What are those different things? What did you care about before?
Me? And I will tell you this. You asked me about being a father. I thought I was far too selfish a guy to be a good dad, but I wasn't. You know, I love being a dad. I love being a dad with Chris. You know, so I care about other people who've had their hearts broken the way I have. And I need them to know that, like Susan Giesman wrote a wonderful book called Still Right Here, you know, that your loved ones are still right here. You know, people ask me all the time in these interviews, you know, or somebody from the audience will say, you know, my sister died and I haven't heard from her. And I go, what have you done? What have you done to enhance the quality for a call? Remember the days when you have the cell phone, you'd go up on somebody's, you know, porch to get a cell phone.
Stand on one leg.
Right, anything to get a cell connection, right? That's what this is, you know. There's a book I brought because I wanted to know more about, you know, how do you figure this stuff out?
The Idiot's Guide to Communicating with Spirits.
Yeah.
I didn't know they made that book.
Neither did I. And when I've read scores of books written by people, you know, who've had these revelations, who've had this exposure, most of them are so dry you can't get through, and some are so frilly you don't want to get through. Mm-hmm. There's a handful of The Light Between Us was this fabulous book by a woman who wrote Signs. I mean, there's some mine's actually, and I can say this with all humility because it was all given to me.
How do you clear that channel or improve that channel, as you were saying? Right.
There's set rules out there, right? And you know, if you want to increase your batting average, you know, you do things, and I do, and I do the sage. I sage my office. Right. I have I have one of those, you know, wands that are made of, you know, it's crystal, right? Whatever the name of it is, you know, I align my chakras with, and these are all things I've picked up from people. Like Andrew was handing out, you know, a chart with chakras, and I align those. I got some great ideas from Jen Weigel, you know, how to meditate, breathing in, breathing out. I light a candle. I focus on the candle. I put pictures of him around that I can focus on. I exhale. I call out his name. And in my case, it just says, hey, Pop, you know, where you been? You know, I've tried to reach you a couple of times, you know.
So he tries to reach you more than you're open to hearing him.
Well, I'm old, man. So when I'm sleeping, you know what I mean? Today when it's really clear that he wants to talk, I am abruptly woken up at 3:00. Abruptly. And it's like, well, gotta go. There's times I feel guilty that I think he wants to talk and I just can't get up, right? But he'll make it up next time we talk. We're not going anywhere. You know, the cool thing about this is I've lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. And I really have. You know, we just came back from Sarasota where I got some more. You know, I mean, I was a wonderful family, wonderful bride, this kid that I adore. And I've got work to do. This book is really important to me. And getting the message out, getting Christopher's message out. But if God tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, sport, today's the day, you know, time to go, I'm good because I got to be what I had on this side. Now I get to cross over and spend the next lap, you know, around the track with the boy that I love so much. So how bad is that, right? My favorite sister, who's in the book, Marcia, who I just adored. I was with her last January, right before February, before she passed away, before we crossed over. And Chris had promised me that he would be there the minute she crossed over. And Chris said to me, or she said to me, you know, Joey, you gave me the greatest gift. I read your book and I'm not afraid to die. I then met a woman on my birthday, a wonderful medium out in Naperville, and her name is Jill. I was supposed to go out for an hour reading, 2.5 hours. First thing she said, your sister Marcia's here. She said, thanks for the greatest gift you gave her. You know,
wow.
You know, those are tag words that just say, I'm here. Mm-hmm. Pay attention, you know.
So you didn't answer the question yet about what was important to you before and what's important to you now.
Prestige, accomplishments, and I always wanted to be a good dad. I had a pretty good teacher. But I had no real regard to what was next. I believed in God, kind of like I said earlier. I believed in him like I believe in the Secretary of the Interior, right? I believe he's there. I don't question his existence, but what do I need? You know, what does that have to do with anything? And I think now I know that we're all going somewhere. And I also know that my son's real proud of this, what I'm doing here, like what I did with Andrew Anderson today. When I send out books to people that need this, you know, your friend who lost a child, right? And there's a business card in there, and that's there so people can call and say, listen, here's what's going on. What can I do? You know, where do I go? You know, Sherry's Jewel has done countless readings for free when people can't afford it, you know? And so, although I still have to make a living and I still have to take care of my family, and I still like being thought of pretty good at my profession, priority is making my son proud and doing good works. I was given this gift of sobriety, and you got to give it away to keep it, right? That's what they say in AA. And the same thing with this gift of connecting with my beautiful son. And I got to give that away to keep it. If I hoard this, I might not keep getting this, right? The downloads might, you know, get limited. I don't know, but I'm not taking a chance. You know, so I think that I'm giving this message so that I can share it with others. You know, and it's changed the course of my life.
Is he the only spirit you communicate with?
Great question. Look, I don't want to be medium. Mm-hmm. And I walk in and I was talking, Jen Weigel said, why don't you call in James from Prague and ask him a question? So I did. And he said, wow. He said, you know, you're highly in tune. You've got it. And I said, yeah, you know, thanks. And he said, you know, your son, Christopher, is sending music, and he's talking about some things that just happened, right? Van Prague was amazing in 15 seconds. You know, so I think, could I possibly become, I don't want to be a medium. I don't want to see your grandfather. Mm-hmm. You know, God bless, probably a great guy. I want to communicate with him, but I also have been able to, mostly him, but I felt my sister around too, you know, but it's usually him, you know. And it was funny. We went and saw Thomas John one time.
I just want to comment about that because when we sat down, you said, you know, I don't really like groups. I like talking to people one-on-one. Yeah. And like in your spirit world conversations, I like my son. I like my sister. Yeah. I'm good.
Yeah. My brother, Jerry, in fact, there's a phenomenal woman from New York that Jen had walked up to us. There was 120 people in Wilmette Theater, walked up and she said, you know, your son, Christopher, and your name's Joe. I said, she goes, you know, Christopher's got the name Joseph in his name, doesn't it? I go, yeah, it's his middle name. So, okay. And then there's another Joe here, a father. Who's that? I That's my dad. It was Joseph. Because there's another guy, Jerry, but it's not Gerald. It's a weird variety name of that variation. I said, that's my brother Jerry, whose name was Jeremiah. I mean, this woman came out of nowhere and just walking through reading people, right? And so my family tends to come through. Thomas John was funnier than heck. We were at the Highland Park, the Infinity Center, and Sally and I were in the front row. And he was over on the other side, just nailing stuff. And he kept looking over, not to us, but on the other side. And he said, I finally need to bring this up. There's this spirit family that people just keep popping up. And he goes, to tell you the truth, they kind of scare me. So my wife elbowed me. She goes, that's your family. I go, probably. So she said, okay. He said, I got to stop. Who's got a son named, who's got an older brother named Jerry? He goes, brother named Billy? I go, yeah. He goes, how about Bobby, who took his life in the 70s? I said, yeah. He said, and then you have your son. He said, son, stepson. I said, no, it's my son. He said, Christopher.
Wow.
He said, he named
the whole family.
And then he said, wait, one more. He said, it's your sister, Pat, who's like an aunt to Chris, because she was my oldest sister, right? She was his aunt. And he said, Chris is making bunny ears behind her head. And the kids always picked on Pat and teased her.
That is amazing.
And then he looked at me and he said, who's Sally? And I pointed to my wife. And he goes, no. 100 years old, who's on the other side? Sally's grandmother, Sally McQuillen, made it to 100 years old and was her closest person. She was her Marcia, right? Her grandmother, who were very close. You can't, there's none of that research, isn't there? You can't connect Joe McQuillen to Sally McQuillen, who died 15 years ago, who made it to 100. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's giving me goosebumps because in past podcasts, we have talked about, in the end, the only thing that matters are relationships.
Yeah.
And our relationships are the most powerful and challenging things we will ever have to do in our entire lives. And when you're talking about what was important to you before and what is important to you now, it sounds very much like that is what you've connected with.
It's relationships. And you know what? Without being too sappy, and love, man. Mm-hmm. There's 3 things in human life are important. Henry James. First is to be kind. Second is to be kind. Third is to be kind. Just be kind. Just be nice. Help somebody. If you read in the book, there's, he talks about his girlfriend, teenage girlfriend who was very close, and we adore her. Talked about him when they were in Arizona pulling over because a car had broken down. And it was a family that didn't have any money, and there were a bunch of kids in a van, and he went and got gas, and they chatted. He said they talked like they were best friends. But that's, that's the kindness my son showed. And so now when I'm driving down the street, and I've talked about that in the book too, and I want to fly by somebody pulled over because I got a tea time, he shames me into stopping, and it's like, God damn. And I always feel so much better because, God doesn't care if I have one more par, but I think he does care if I'm kind to his people.
Yeah. What is your belief about why people are here on earth and what happens when we die?
Well, I'm just going to go what he tells me. And my son tells me that this is boot camp and that his side is a beach house in Maui. That's exactly what he told me. So we have to learn things here. And if we don't learn things here, we can or don't have to, but we'll come back. We don't learn enough, right? And what happens when we die is we cross the room. It's like opening one door to another. There's a great movie called What Dreams May Come. Mm-hmm. Remember that movie?
Yes.
And Cuba Gooding Jr., who was the spirit guy, says to Robin Williams, he said the word body comes from bodic, meaning structure, meaning house. He said, you live in your house. You aren't your house. Your house falls down. You get up and you move out. And that really helped me understand what happens. This goes, but energy doesn't change. The spirit doesn't change. We move to another dimension and we've evolved and we're in a much higher energy. So when you talk about what do I do to connect, it's not all voodoo. I do it to raise my energy because he's got to lower his energy enough that we can meet in the middle. So he slows down his energy on the other side. I raise mine so his psychic slug of a dad can get to a plane that we can connect. And that's where the meditation comes from. That's when the chanting or whatever, the drums, whatever works for you. This works for me. Does that mean I'm not constantly learning? Man, I just scratched the surface. This was a boots on the ground kind of, connecting with my kid for dummies, and that's the first 2 years, but the rest of my existence is going to be following the breadcrumbs that he's leaving for me.
Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And I was wondering if your sense of purpose and meaning in this world now is to pass this message along.
100%.
To help other people and other families that are suffering, right, with grief and loss, that there is hope, that there is more.
That's it. That's purely what my mission is. Mm-hmm. I can't change the suffering. I can't, put food on people's plates in India. I can't do a whole lot of things, but I can be a vessel, a conduit for others who've lost something, that I can look at them and say, they're not gone, man. Now, let's be clear about something. It's a bad trade, right? I wish I was abysmally ignorant, chasing the almighty buck, taking my kid to ball games, having pizza, hanging out, golfing, right? I wish I'd trade that in the day for this awareness that I've got, but I don't get to unring that bell. That's done, right? So, but what I can do is take this and let somebody else know that it's not the same, but it's not over. You can connect with it. Do it with mediums. Then try to figure it out by yourself. I do both. I'll go see a medium, every now and then, and I love seeing new ones. And mediums are funny. They're like chefs. They're like, well, why would you go there? And I go, because you don't want to eat Italian every day. Sometimes I want Mexican. You know what I mean? Sometimes I want Greek food. And that's what I want, other insights, the people I've been exposed to have been phenomenal, though. Chance of being disappointed are pretty low if you check out the right people. And you go online, and like anything else, I'm a mortgage broker. I'm a really good mortgage broker. I'm really helpful to people, right? And all of my business is referral. But what's a better way for like a medium than somebody refers? So somebody says, hey, this guy, Andrew Anderson, said, I can get, because of your book and I did this thing with Kevin Moore, this British filmmaker, and it's on YouTube, and it's called, they call us channelers, and mine's the first episode. I was blessed that he came in to do that. He said, I'm getting calls from all over the world. I'm reading people on the phone all over the world because of what you've exposed. He said, you have no idea how many people you've touched. Yeah. And that's what it's about for me.
So I think you have another message besides that.
Okay.
And, even if you want to take a moment to think about this, or you probably already have, what would you say to other mothers and fathers who have lost a child? And you allude to, if there was a suicide, there's another level of something. What message do you have for them in this world of how to move on, or whatever it is, how to live with this loss?
Great question. And I've actually mentioned in the book that it said every parent who's lost a kid rethinks every bad decision, every time they said no when they should have said yes. Simon said yes when they should have said no. I mean, guilt-ridden. Chris smashed a car up a couple years before he crossed, and I went off on him. And he wasn't doing anything bad. He just wasn't paying attention. And I regret that. It's simple. But if it's suicide, there's an extra level of undeserved responsibility that you impose on yourself. That there is nothing that you could have to do to undo what was done. But the one thing I can tell you for a fact, I'm sure of this. I know this. I went from believing to knowing, right? I went from believing to knowing this is true, that they're okay now. And they love you, and they're given an opportunity. They're going to tell you, and they're going to tell you specifics that only you know, like about the Reese cups or whatever. That's just going to be the sign that said, this is between you and me, Mom. This is that they're good. My son doesn't suffer, and he suffered from addiction. He suffered from ADD, where he gets from his old man. He suffered from, he didn't have he had learning, he had some learning issues. He had a little bit of a speech impediment, right? That nobody else knew, but he was self-conscious about, right? All of that stuff's gone. All it is their pure self now, their best self. And they love you. And they've let go of all of that. They've processed it. As I said before we were talking, that for the first 6 months, every time we had a medium reading, Sally or I, he would come through and say, it was just a dumb mistake. It was just a dumb mistake. And he felt so terrible about imposing the grief on us. After that first 8 months or whatever, he came to grips with it. He's made peace with that, and he never brought it up again. It's like, it's done. He's gone beyond that. So whatever malady, I'll tell you this is great. My sister Marcia died of cancer, and she was this dynamic, amazing gal. And so she tried treatment for a couple of years and it didn't help. So she finally, she was in her probably 76 when she finally, it's just, I'm not going to take any more treatment. My quality of life is terrible. It's time. And Chris said, don't worry. The minute she crosses over, I'll be there. So not long after Marcia died, he came through to me and said, we were here. And he named Bobby, Jerry, Billy, Pat. We were here for when Marcia crossed over. And here's something that I know I didn't make up because I'm not that smart. He said, we greeted her and she was with us. Then she had to go somewhere because of the trauma that the cancer caused. Even though she left her body besides, her soul had some trauma. So she went somewhere. He said, think of it like a spa. That was what a nice way to put it, right? And he said, and when she came back and joined the group, she was younger than when I even remember her when I was a kid. This wasn't my imagination. I never thought a spa. I didn't think you went to a spa and healed. But doesn't that make sense? Mm-hmm. The trauma carried with her. Yeah. It was like having, PTSD, right? Mm-hmm. And then they, somewhere the divinity has a car wash that gets it all out, and you come back and join the group.
Sounds like there's still some learning to do on the other side.
Constant.
Too. Yeah.
And there's jobs. He works with young kids who've crossed over. There's jobs over there. There's levels. He said to me a couple years back, he said, I'm being promoted to a new level, but don't worry, Pop. It's not going to change our communication. He said, it's similar to a phone call from Phoenix or LA. Doesn't matter. It's a little farther. It's just as clear. Mm-hmm. That's what he told me.
Wow.
So, yeah, there are levels and there are learning, but it's like learning on a beach in Maui, man, as opposed to, and he said, think about football camp, Pop. He said, you enjoyed it, but it was really hard work and it would hurt your body and you'd get beat up. And he said, but you enjoyed the time. He said, that's what your world is. It's the preparation, So tell those people, they're kids who are gone, love them.
And they'll see him again.
And I promise you that. They'll see him again.
So the reason we're sitting here today is because of Sherry.
Sherry Jewell.
Sherry Jewell. And what impact did she have in your journey?
She was great. I got to tell you. Jen Weigel sends out this bottle shop, meeting with Sherry Jewell. And Sally, Caroline, and I showed up. And we were all sitting on the couch. And I was the only guy, which isn't uncommon, right? Guys are supposed to suck this up. And I just don't buy into that, And I got to tell you, there's a wonderful, another movie called Manchester by the Sea. And the woman said, my heart's broken. It'll always be broken. People who say things like, time heals all wounds, haven't lost a kid, right? It doesn't heal. Mm-hmm. You acquire tools that help you function, but it's never going to go away. It'll always be there. I don't want it to go away. I like the connection, The pain is very indicative of the amount of love that I had. So we went to this bottle shop, and Sherry comes by and she's talking to her. You know how she is, outgoing and fun. And she said, whoa. She pointed at me. She goes, and I was like the last guy in the door. So I was supposed to be the last one getting a reading. She said, your son, Chris, is here. So I guess we're going now. And we went up to the front and she talked about him, described fishing. She described baseball. She described all. She said, he's describing a hat that you wear. And I picked up the hat that was upside down on the table, and it was the description. From then on, her and I have been friends. Sometimes she'll just call me and say, Chris is here. I got to tell you, when I was there in Florida when my sister was gone, and hadn't gone yet. She was going, and he said, just thinking about you and Chris here. He goes, yeah, your sister Marcia, she's going to be greeted by a little white dog. I said, no, she's got a little white dog here on this side. She goes, no, little white dog. Then I remembered the exact same duplicate of that dog she'd had before. and is waiting for her on the other side.
Wow.
And I was trying to convince her she was wrong. And they go, they know what they know. No. So Sherry and I have become very good pals, and we've appeared together. We've support each other. She's, very gifted at this. And my son likes her. So he comes through. There's times when Jen Weichel makes me leave because Chris is so persistent that other people aren't going to get it. She goes, it's like I got to go stand in the bathroom, and hope that Chris doesn't show up. So
he keeps taking the mic.
Yeah. Right? It's like, it's me. So, and that's because, I think he gets a kick out of who she is, and I think that's like that. I think it's like great coaches. People say, if you brought, frauds. No, I haven't run any frauds. I've ran into some mediums that aren't great, but most of them are, or getting better or working on their craft. It's like a chef. Not every chef's a great chef. Mm-hmm. Not every field goal kicker is a great field goal kicker.
Not every therapist is a great therapist.
Not every therapist is a great therapist, but when you get the one that meshes with you, that one teacher that clicked, that one coach that got you going back for a little more, that's Sherry.
Yeah. And we are hosting Sherry.
She is having a gallery on May 13th.
I'll be there.
That would be awesome.
I'll be there.
And we are going to be
at Copper Fiddle.
Hosting it at Copper Fiddle.
In Lake Zurich.
Yes. And you can get tickets on our Facebook page, Couple Synergy. It will be an event there. And
I'll send it out to my email group too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That would be really awesome.
Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. Joe, is there any final message you wanted to pass along to our listeners out there? Maybe something that you've learned from Christopher, or just you've learned in general? Just in general. We've all lost people that we love, and by the way, we're all going, right? I mean, buckle up. We're all going. You may as well accept that right now. But where we're going is surrounded by people we've already lost who we love dearly. But those people are still right here. Work on it. Ask questions. Call me. Give me a call. I don't know if you can post my email or my cell phone. You can do that. Yeah.
You got a question, you want to know something, need a book, give me a call, right? And the bottom line is you just got to try to get your arms around that the ones that you lost are still around you. You just got to work on the communication on your end. They've already got it on theirs, right? They're waiting for you to open the door. Just work at it.
That is awesome. Awesome message. Joe, thank you so much for being on our podcast.
And absolutely
today.
My pleasure.
And, for those out there that want to pick up his book, as he said, if you want to email him, he will definitely contact you directly. You can also get his book on Amazon as well. And the book is called My Search for Christopher on the Other Side.
It's in print, Kindle, and Audible.
Awesome.
Get all three.
Get all
trifecta.
three.
Hit the trifecta.
And it's Joe McQuillen, just for all of you that might be searching for the book.
People have been sharing their stories since the beginning of time to grow and bond and heal. And we hope that by you sharing your story, it's enriched your life and the life of our listeners.
I guarantee it has for me.
We want to wholeheartedly thank all of our listeners for joining us today and for joining us on Couple Synergy. Our passion is in helping couples and families have happy and healthy relationships, and this podcast gives us a fun way of bringing our knowledge and expertise to you, our listeners. For all of you listening, please subscribe to our podcast and please leave us a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, please email us at contact@couplesynergy.com. For more information about Couple Synergy and our programs such as Relationship 101, the Couples Weekend Intensive, and our premier program called Couple to Couple, look us up online at couplesynergy.com.
And if you know anyone that can benefit from this episode, please download it and share it. And thank you for listening.
Until next time, synergize your life, synergize your love.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Kedkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Kedkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.